Well, Mr. Sloan, how are you doing tonight? Looks like less than 30 minutes before the polls close. Are you optimistic, sir?
Well, listen, we're really excited. We've obviously, our entire team has been pounding the streets. We've been handing out tens of thousands of pieces of literature. We've been participating in debates all over the province. We've been doing, television ads, radio ads. We've been getting the message out there. The freedom message, the anti-globalist message, the fiscal responsibility message, that has been getting out there to people all across Ontario. And so that's the main thing. Obviously, as a new party, you don't necessarily expect to win government your first time at the plate, but we're here fighting hard, and we've changed the conversation, and for that I'm proud.
Most recently, Derek, I interviewed, or I covered a rally, rather, that Tom Marazzo was holding in Peterborough, and I saw a very strong showing of signs in that riding. Are there some ridings more than others that you feel more confidently about?
So some of the ridings where we have high-profile candidates. So Rick Nichols, obviously, is an incumbent member of provincial parliament. Myself, I'm known in my riding. Tom is a high-profile candidate. So some of these ridings, Essex is another. Essex as well as Oxford are both the ridings that are strong for us. So I think we're going to show strongly in those ridings. Winning obviously is a challenge, but we certainly have a shot at winning a couple of seats. We'll see what happens. Obviously, nobody knows the future.
And Derek, speaking of the future, the Cassandras out there, by that I mean the pollsters, most of them, or all of them, I should say, they are predicting a Ford PC majority government, maybe even the Ford PCs winning more seats than they did in 2018, which was 76 seats. I see projections of 80 plus in some polls. It's baffling to me, Derek, because, we look at the economy with the cost of living, the cost of energy, housing, the healthcare system. These are all terrible files right now. And usually that spells ominous news for an incumbent sitting government. And yet we have all these projections of Ford making gains. Do you think the pollsters are wrong, or is there something here that I'm not seeing happen in this Ontario election?
Well, I think there's several things going on. One is that I think there is a lot of dissatisfaction with the federal Liberals. And so the natural inclination for many people is to vote Conservative provincially. Mm-hmm. I also think, unfortunately, a lot of Canadians still have yet to wake up to the mismanagement that the Ford government had during COVID-19. So I think that's part of it. And I also think that Ford is sort of winning on the coattails of sort of managing in a crisis. And you know how whenever a crisis happens, the incumbent government, unless they really mess it up, gets a bump in the polls. So I think that's part of it. And the other part of it, too, is the other parties are just really lousy. I mean, the leadership in the Liberal Party and the NDP Party is awful. And I think that, frankly, the average person who hasn't tuned in yet to some of the other alternatives, Ford gets the benefit of that.
And, the statistics by the pollsters would back you up on when it comes to the leadership people, Derek, because one poll indicated that more than 50% of voters wish that all three main parties had different leaders. That's, quite a damning statistic. What do you make of that, Tamara?
Yeah, well, I think that leads to the fact that there needs to be the stronger showing of the alternatives. People are not happy with the mega parties, who are mostly just the uniparty at this point, and there needs to be some strong opposition to hold the feet to the fire, hold some accountability, and that's what me personally, at least, I'm hoping to see as we move forward into this election, knowing that there are some other options, but not everyone does, and so that, I think, is a major shortfalling in this election, and seeing the way that all of the uniparty has responded throughout the COVID pandemic.
And I'll just comment, we've heard from Elections Ontario so far that election turnout up until 5 o'clock was actually very low. So there is some indication, there's been some other articles saying that, this election, not many people care about it. So I think there is this idea that, people, a good chunk of people don't like any of the major parties, but they still have yet to learn about some of the alternatives. So this was a great run, this election, for our party and some of the other parties. And I think we can grow off this in the future.
Well, nothing bothers me more, Derek, than voter apathy. There is absolutely no excuse not to go to the polling booth and cast your ballot. And I mean, even if you dislike every single candidate, every party, you can go and you can decline your ballot. Imagine if, say, 3 or 4 million Ontarians, instead of just sitting at home and not voting, went to the polling booth and said, I'm declining my ballot. I don't think any of you are worthy of my vote. What a message that would send. I think when you see people around the world dying to achieve democracy, when people here who have it and take it for granted, I think that almost makes a mockery of the system, quite frankly.
Well, you know, I agree with you. It is a good thing for parties like us, because people who support parties like us, we have, 95% voter turnout for, close to 100%. So the fewer people who are voting for these other parties, it actually does help parties like ours. So it evens out in the end. But I agree. I wish more Ontarians were tuned in and awake to what's going on in our province.
Yeah, and certainly, Tamara, the weather, at least in the GTA, is not a factor. It's like almost perfect conditions. It's sunny, warm, not humid, no rain. I mean, what excuse do you have to stay home?
Well, in a riding of a family member of mine, they lived in that house for approximately 20 years, so they've seen a lot of canvassing happen in the neighborhood, and they said that this year in particular, the Conservative MPP is canvassing so hard. They've come around the neighborhood about 4 or 5 separate times, and even today they came to offer rides to the polls. Yep. So I think that the Conservatives are feeling the heat on this election, despite the polls, what the polls are saying. I think some of these individual ridings where they've lost a lot of their base, they're starting to see the repercussions of ignoring their constituents for the last 2 years.
Well, I really hope that...
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dark.
Sorry, Dave. I'm just going to say, I really hope that they do worse than they did last time, frankly. They don't deserve to do better. There's a general apathy and a mistrust of all the mainstream parties, and I really hope that the results today reflect that in some way.
And Derek, we're just about out of time, but I agree with what Tamara is saying, and I think one of the tipping points in terms of the base voters, the grassroots voters of the PC party, came just over 2 years ago when Doug Ford referred to the protesters on Queen's Park lawns as a bunch of yahoos. And these were people, almost all of whom I spoke with, admit to voting PC back in 2018. They were losing their jobs. They were losing their livelihoods. They were losing their businesses. They were peacefully protesting. And to be described that way, a lot of people said that was Doug Ford's Hillary Clinton moment when she said the basket of deplorables. And I say, no, it's worse, because Hillary Clinton was talking about Trump supporters, the opposition. Doug was demonizing his own base. And I think those people that were so upset in the last 2 years about how this lockdown was proceeding, I can see them staying at home or spoiling their ballot. Last word goes to you, my friend.
Well, listen, I don't know if the Dominion voting machines recognize spoiled ballots. That would be funny to see. We'll see what happens. Obviously, everybody knows I'm against these mail-in ballots and these voting machines. Some of our internal polling has definitely shown our party at much more strength than what some of these mainstream polls are showing. So we'll see what happens. I mean, listen, I'm going to take the results with a grain of salt. We're going to keep fighting no matter what happens. Whatever happens tonight is small in comparison to the work that needs to be done. And we're going to keep moving. We're going to keep spreading the word on all these important issues, whether it's freedom or digital ID or any of these things. And we're going to wake up Ontario to make sure that when the time is right, we can bring a government in that actually respects people, that actually stands up for families, and that actually will put freedom on the agenda again. So that's my commitment to you and the rest of the country, and particularly Ontario.